So, but the limitation on charging speed is typically the car, or can be the car once you get at these levels. I mean, so when the Leaf or the Bolt EV pull up to one of these at 150 kilowatt, it's going to be at the car's limitation. So I would just want to open that up, lay out where we are with Ameren, Missouri. By the way, we're still following a process for the rest of the charging ecosystem, which is the localized charging I mentioned. We were not allowed to do that, but the commission is interested in it and opened a working docket. There was a workshop yesterday on that topic, not just related to our case. Our case triggered that workshop, but the workshop is more broad about how should the commission be looking at electric vehicle charging. So I just wanted to open up with that about the scouting, thinking about RFP, Ameren moving forward, and get thoughts or reactions, as well as open up for other utilities to maybe update on how they're thinking about this and next steps.
This is Connie Ford with Missouri Public Utility Alliance. Some things are a little bit more straightforward in the investor-owned utilities versus the municipally owned utilities. And one of the biggest challenges is that you, instead of answering to one public service commission, if we have these in 12 municipally owned government utilities, that means that we have 12 mini PSCs that have to approve this. And so that means that not only is the utility going to have to get this a very fine-tuned number within their budget, get that budget approved, but then in many cases that utility is going to have to go back to their council or their governing board and also get that appropriation approved. So sometimes there's a multi-layer thing. So the municipals definitely support the RFP process through the state, and especially anything that helps define the parameters of what businesses or what properties are going to get these charging stations. Because if the assumption is that this business is going to benefit from foot traffic coming through them, they could potentially have more income because people are charging their cars there for a little bit. They're going in, they might be buying a soda, they might be going, if it's a Bass Pro, if it's a Tesla station, they might be going in and spending a lot more money. So that presents a problem for a municipal government because you can't necessarily pick winners and losers. So when it comes up to identifying the site, anything that could be in that RFP process that would score those sites on certain amenities for the driver, but then also if there were any businesses that wanted to bring some money to the table as well, that would definitely help as far as municipal utilities and getting that through the process and making sure that those checks and balances are there. Municipal governments are a lot like DNR and state governments, that they have lots of purchasing rules. And like I said, in the communities, the more that we can go and show those governing boards and those councils that due diligence is happening, and anything that we can help justify that is better. So that I wanted to make sure that that was out there, and that's kind of why I was asking a little bit more questions about, when the RFP would go out, because there's a lot of councils are going to be hinging on their decision on that. So that to me is a very important part of that, as well as, like I said, there's a lot of dots on the map, that there's a lot of people traveling down the highway, but there might not be in the best economic situation in areas of our state. And so some municipal governments, they're an electric utility, they're still struggling as well, and their communities are struggling. So if you put out there a big, large dollar item, they might be a little less likely to do that. So the cost share is also going to be, some cities are, let's do this today, but there is a wide variety when you're talking about the whole state and the different economies. So there's a lot of challenges there. But we definitely, municipal utilities want to see this and want to move forward. And there might be some sites that, we can talk to this a little bit too, where the munis and the co-ops might have to work together, because that those territory lines, or sometimes, you know, you go across the highway and it might not be the muni anymore, it's the co-op. So I look forward to working with we look forward to working with co-ops on some of these different locations. And with that, I think that's all I have, unless anyone has any questions.
This is Tom with Greenlands. I actually just have a couple comments. So one, I just wanted to share, and I'm sure ChargePoint has some stories as well. You know, we've had the experience of working with a number of municipal utilities in different contexts, but I think the one that's most analogous is a number of municipal utilities in the Tri-Cities area of Washington State, who had to work together ultimately to submit a grant application to the Washington Department of Transportation, line that up with an RFP process as well. And so, you know, if there's an interest, certainly happy to make some connections there for lessons learned. But I also wanted to just note quickly, and this is probably a topic that will need to be discussed in more depth. You know, it's our view that in the relatively near term, let's say a 1 to 3 year time horizon, there's not going to be a meaningful, positive economic impact for businesses who are locating charging stations. And indeed, you know, I think as an important part of this consideration and just being mindful of, frankly, the value of property that they're bringing to the table for the parking spaces associated with the charging infrastructure is an important you know, component of the financial decision or you know, thought process around what those businesses might be bringing to the table.
Yeah, and any information that you have would be appreciated, especially if there's any studies that have been done as far as the economic development over the next 3 or 4 years. I think that would be important information to bring forward to the councils or the governing boards.
So this is Wendy with Kansas City Power and Light. So Pat, in light of the Ameren filing and the results, I know we're evaluating internally whether or not we want to do something similar with incentives, or do we want to retain ownership as an extension of our clean charge network or some third solution. So I don't have an answer for you yet. That's all being socialized internally, and we've had quite a few discussions over the last few weeks.
Makes sense, Wendy. To throw out another thought about, so if, you know, as we're thinking about it now for Ameren in these, you know, 5 to or 8 to 15 sites, maybe it's a dozen. It may be that it's an RFP, it's competitive, that says, you know, winner take all. We don't know yet if we would break it up into pieces. But we know some sites are going to get more use than others and bring in more revenue than others, and have less operating costs in some ways. But I've been grappling with the whole RFP process, and we talk about a state RFP, and I'm thinking about the Ameren RFP, or if KCP&L ends up doing it, maybe they've got an RFP. And want to just plant a seed out there that maybe a state RFP is not the right approach, but state oversight of regional RFPs to make sure they're of a competitive basis and work properly. Because I'm not sure, like, for how we need to think about it in terms of how does ChargePoint or Greenlots or any other development or business customer that is really interested in this look at an RFP and bid on it well. It needs it pretty well defined. Need to know what they're getting into. And if it's just kind of, you know, this is not RFP to supply paper towels that can just be shipped, and so we can all, you know, latch onto the state contract on that. It's much more specialized. And so it may be, what I'm wondering out loud is there, are there maybe a number of RFPs, depending on who the utilities are or potential owners, that where you could say represent munis throughout the state, and we define those well, and there's an RFP that speaks to that, and we work with the state to figure out okay, how much funding can go to support that? You know, ultimately, we need a champion that has vested interest in those locations, and
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting way of looking at that. I hadn't really thought about that, but my feeling right off the bat is that seems, because when you know, how are you gonna divide the state up? Because the economically challenged areas are in all four corners, you know, some communities. I guess from previously working in local government, the idea of multiple RFPs just makes my head spin as far as trying to wrap my head around how that would actually happen. You know, it's different if you're in a certain part of the state, but if you're spread out all over the state, then you can't necessarily easily divide them up. You know, you have Springfield that's going to be a lot different than, you know, someone that's in the central south part of the state.
yeah.
You know,
that-
so
it
you
is.
get up to the very northwestern corner, northwest part of the state, and you get out of that Kansas City metro area, that might be more like southeast Missouri. So I don't, chime in too, but I'm not, I think it's an interesting idea, and I kind of like that approach, but logistically, I'm not quite sure how it could work.
I get what you're saying. I think the problem is for, let's say Tom gets an RFP or Dedrick and they see it and it's not identified with certainty. Okay, these cities are in, they're committed to buying. Now we need to bid on what we're gonna do. If we're waiting for cities to find out what's the price to put it in my city, it may be more difficult because you can't bid knowing that, okay, I'm bidding on these, you know, red dots, but Ameren decides, well, I don't want to put these three in. That changes the formula for how much equipment. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
because
well,
this is so specialized.
that's why I was kind of waiting to see what the strategies for procurement and development group had to come back.
Oh, that's right. They have to solve this. I forgot.
Well, I
We
was just
outsourced
interested in what they
that.
had to say, because I'm assuming that studying other RFPs, plus we have other vendors here that might be able to enlighten us a little bit on how to do that. I think you had mentioned at one point doing different scoring, because it's not just necessarily cost, it's also, okay, is this site within, you know, walking distance of amenities, and you score it a certain way, you get so many points for that. Or you score it, you know, a little bit different, or you have a couple points for, is it open 24/7? You know, there's different things within that, I think, that you could do that would get you at that end result to make sure it's a fair, competitive process. As far as the price goes, I think that it would be nice to have a little bit further development and look at some prices that have been happening in nearby states, so we could kind of get an idea. But, I mean, we could still get commitment within a range.
Okay.
I mean, you can put something in a budget, and then you can also, whenever you go to actually get that appropriation, you can say up to this amount. If it comes in lower, yay.
And you alluded to the complication of not being able to go out to bid until, you know, you have the money, right?
Yeah. But at that point, you could do up to, and as long as they have it in the budget, then that would be fine. Yeah. That was a little bit different. I was just trying to see whether, when I asked that question earlier, whether if there was only 3 million out there and they put out an RFP that they were expecting to spend $6 million on, whether they could technically do that or not. Because it would be nice to get those RFPs back well beforehand, and then that way we could really tighten things up and then go and spend the money and start the projects. That was more of a timing question.
This is Jane, Columbia Water and Light. I have one comment about what you guys were talking about, and we'll probably address it more when John goes over his PowerPoint, but I reviewed Colorado's plan, and they divided their state into 6 corridors, and it's possible that we could do something similar instead of maybe not necessarily it could be sort of by munis, by co-ops, by IOUs. I mean, we could relook the map with that thought in mind. And also they did tier 1 and tier 2 funding, so that you might, an economically depressed part of the state would be the tier 1, maybe get more funding, or a major highway is tier 1, so you could just look at it different ways for funding.
This is Lynn Shea with Associated Electric. I will chime in on my updates, and a lot of it really kind of resembles what Connie shared with the municipals, is that I have contacted those cooperatives that would serve the areas that are identified on this proposed map, and all of the our groups that I spoke to, cooperatives I spoke to, are very interested in pursuing it and staying aware of the situation. However, their budgets, there's a lot of unknowns at this point as we're discussing, and I think that's certainly going to be a key driver as to the timing of it. What is my initial investment? What is my long-term investment? What are my options as far as owning the station? So all of those pieces, I think, are driving ultimately what their decision as far as if they would want to be participating in this as, the utility provider. So I think the RFP process is a lot of their questions as well, as how are we going to do this? Who selects the host, location, that type of thing. In some of these areas, it may not be as truthfully competitive as other areas, because there could be like, okay, we have a super Walmart this close to the highway, that type of thing. It might be that would be on the surface a better location. Of course, we still have to have it opened up and be transparent, so if there's other venues within that range. And
Makes sense. I have a question for you two. Do you see your member utilities as being engaged enough to start doing outreach, like to take kind of an ownership role for their territory and finding or looking at, hey, these sites could work, or talking to businesses, kind of like we're talking about doing at Ameren or have started? Or are they leaving it kind of to your leadership to say, okay, Connie and Lynn, go figure this out and let us know? Because I feel like there's really I don't imagine have the bandwidth to go run all that down, and I would hope that they have some real interest in figuring out for their community where would it best be situated and what kind of businesses could support it, and then perhaps where it's appropriate, there's a competitive process. It may be in some locations it's just obvious, here's the one good location, and we work with them. But do you sense that they're engaged enough to do some legwork on that sort of thing, or is it just vary by location?
I'll say that yes, I think there is the desire, and we even verbally over the phone, talked about some of the potential locations, and because I do travel quite a bit, I was pretty familiar with some of the locations that they were talking about. So yes, but as far as reaching out to the business, no, because I think they, and rightfully so, would not feel that they would have the information needed to go have an intelligent conversation and say, hey, are you interested in this? I don't have any details. I think definitely the potential locations, but that, I think, until the details are fleshed out a little bit more, or at least we have some definition of, like, let's say in May, where we know we have funding this amount, we're pursuing X number of stations across Missouri, I think some of that would have to be established.
I feel like this is so new. I feel like we have to wade in a little bit, and that's why we're planning to interact. Now, we're in a little bit different position, and the fact sheet that we developed, and could you pull that up from the base camp? Yep. We developed a fact sheet to be able to go into communities and talk to utilities or potentially customers. And what I recognized after we developed that was we got approval. The fact sheet I have needs to be different, because now I've got a program that gives an amount of incentive that could be available and can be a little more specific about maybe what our process is going to be, and you're not in that position yet. However, I would say that I think there could be benefit to getting out there with the information that's on the fact sheet that we developed, that's more vague, that says, 50% is a starting point. We don't know where it's going to go. It will hopefully be less match that's needed than that. And start seeing what it's going to take, between those, because that may help inform what we decide here about how much is available,
Yeah, I don't think there's, I mean, in some spots, it's very obvious where it might be. And then there's other cities where it's like, a historic town or somewhere where there's a draw. It's like, oh, this would be a good site. So I think that's really easy to do conceptually, but again, they can't necessarily go knocking on someone's door and say, hey, we think this is a good spot. We're going to be kind of working with you. It has to be open and transparent. So I think it's fairly easy to go in and, same that Linda, there's some very, very obvious in some communities where it might go. But again, you just have to be very careful when you're in municipal government that you're not picking winners and losers.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have that ability
and
to do
I think
that.
we'll run into the same thing as a utility that serves all these different customers. And we could be subject to a complaint about picking them, but we plan to raise awareness. All of those locations would be eligible to try, but trying to figure out which ones are going to score well and be honest with those that aren't going to score well on why we think that would be the case.
And I think that our situation is quite a bit different as far as in your territory, because there's a lot of options in your territory, especially along the highways and metro areas. Not all of your area. Not all of your area.
We get a lot of rural space.
But it's,
Yeah. We're going to be in the same boat as you in some places, but much different in some others. You're right.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So these numbers are based on rebates paid by Ameren to the host site?
So the 360 is what we put in our tariff, and that was based on some estimating I did for design work, site development, line extension, which could include, transformer upgrade or transformer to site. Everything that goes into it except land or lease. And so it was what we considered at the time, based on the information we had and our own experience, to be enough to build it. So hopefully a tie. So this is the fact sheet that we put together. It is on Basecamp, I believe.
Yep.
And you can take a look if you want, but it's meant to be used to raise awareness about the VW Trust dollars and our process of trying to raise awareness about the opportunity and increase, get some interest in it. So take some time to get to Basecamp and take a look at that.
The first page of it, just introduction to Volkswagen, because Pat envisioned this fact sheet being something you walk into a place and start talking to someone fresh. They have no idea. Introduce them to it, talk about the potential locations, and then the second page is who are we? Who is this group? What is the opportunity here? So just kind of introducing it gently to people and giving them a contact, which would be myself as the main Volkswagen person. For the state. So if they have questions, they don't know what you're talking about, they can go to someone at the state and really get some answers and really talk through some of the options, even though things are, in flux right now. So still trying to make some
decisions. I
envision
putting my business card on it as I went in and would talk to somebody, or maybe I'm talking to a manager and they say, oh, okay, well, I'm busy, let me give it to our owner. Now, we'll be going in with typically a call to the business from a customer service person or something. I won't just cold call them, cold walk in and talk to the clerk at whatever business it is, but just wanted you to be aware of that.
Yeah. In the interest of time, I think, Pat, you've got a couple more slides, or
Okay.
do you want to?
Yeah,
Do
go
you wanna
ahead.
jump
If
through
you'll
those
remind me,
and
I didn't bring a copy of them with me since I developed it last night. Okay, so that's really all I had. The others were, if topics came up from previous slides, I threw a few up there. So that's really all I had. I guess bottom line is Amron's going to start moving forward, keeping engaged with this group and working together. But it's good news that, hey, the red dots, we should get those developed now. And if there's anything else we should talk about in this group, let's do it. Here you go, Jack.
I'm learning a lot at this meeting. Honestly, I'm thinking, I don't know if you can smell the wood burning, but I've been really thinking about this. Yeah, you guys have all brought up a whole bunch of considerations and things that have to be thought about at the state level and municipal level, and, you know, because Missouri is not an homogeneous state. I mean, it's different all over the place. There's, you know, in the different kinds of utilities and so forth. And I guess I just want to toss something out here, and maybe this is way beyond the scope of this commission. But frankly, Missouri is ranked number 46 in adopting renewable energy out of 50 states, okay? Now, Columbia's doing great, and Springfield, and St. Louis, Kansas City, you know, there's all kinds of pockets. But by and large, the geography of Missouri is supported by coal-fired power plants, okay? We emit 60% more coal emissions than the national average, the state of Missouri does. Now, we don't necessarily use it all. We sell it to Arkansas or other places. This is a serious problem that we are going to have to address in a relatively short period of time, okay? And I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, maybe this little seed money, this activity, maybe this should be the catalyst or the foundation to start thinking statewide. How are we going to get the whole state brought up with renewable energy? And instead of trying to do this piecemeal in all these different utilities or municipalities, maybe we need to think about doing it at the state level and getting the governor's office involved and, you know, whoever. And let's think about this, because we're kind of, you know, rearranging the deck chairs right now, you know, and we don't have a lot of time.
So Jack, are you talking about something similar to what New Mexico did today?
No, honestly, I didn't know what New Mexico.
They created a state mandate today.
How about, they just said today?
Yeah,
No
100%
kidding.
renewable by 2045, I think.
Wow.
So it's possible, but this is not the,
Right, I mean,
we are
this-
the right ones.
This might not be the venue, but I
Right.
think the Division of Energy, with their policy focus on energy resources for the state, great fit, and also helping us work on this. You know, this is where we start building those connections. The Public Service Commission has a role in developing and approving plans, so this is just one piece of it. But
Right.
yeah, you're talking the right things. I just don't know that we can make a
Well, it
big
might
jump
be,
there.
it might be just something you want to take up with some of those people over lunch or coffee and say,
Sure.
hey, we're looking at all these little things that we got to work, and wouldn't it be a lot easier if we would elevate this up to the state level? And we'll have to find out what New Mexico did, and maybe that could be the model, I just would like to see us move the whole state, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll throw it to John now. John Ecclestone with Energy has some words on our third subgroup.
And I actually have a PowerPoint as well.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Is it on the, where's it at?
So it's on Basecamp.
On Basecamp. Great, let me pull it up.
And in the meantime, I agree 100% I agree we need a transition to 100% renewable energy. At the very least, transition to 100% carbon emissions-free energy as I apply New Mexico's efforts, and I think that's that time is running out for us. And I'm the generation who's going to have to deal with it. So yeah, that's and I actually in this presentation I'm going to talk about kind of trying to a little bit kind of touch on renewable energy generation, some of these distributed resources.
Stacy, is there any way for me to download that?
I will email it to you.
Thank you.
I know you're all good. Hi everyone, my name is John. I'm going to be presenting on the strategies for procurement and deployments. Just a little overview of what we've done as a group, I missed one. I want to first thank first and foremost Stacy Allen for assisting in the administrating or the facilitating of these group discussions, and even helping review 2 RFPs. I also want to thank Pat Justice, Robin, and Jane, and also Larry for assisting in this. Their engagement in this proactive planning process has helped me better understand the necessary requirements truly needed in order to develop this minimum practical network. So thank you all for that. I'll begin this by just giving a little highlighting what we've done as a subgroup. We're in the process of drafting a request for proposal to select and oversee projects, award funds, submit funding requests, and report to the trustee and the public on implementation. Now this is in coordination with Pat's Barriers and Development subgroup. We're soliciting feedback through extensive public outreach and engagement process. Robin is also assisting on the engagement process. And then one key area that we're doing as the Strategies for Procurement subgroup is we're identifying, studying, and contacting other states, and also analyzing regions that have implemented an electric vehicle network to capture the lessons learned. And now for slide 3, I believe the objective of our electric vehicle collaborative today is we're establishing a strategy to foster communication between all stakeholders to create best practices and procedures. We're coordinating locations for electric vehicle infrastructure. We're identifying voluntary minimum standards and we're leveraging economies of scale. We're also effectively distributing hopefully we're going to effectively distribute the intended $6 million allocated for electric vehicle charging infrastructure from the Volkswagen Trust to develop our minimum practical network of DC fast charging stations along the Missouri statewide highway corridors to accelerate the deployment of electric vehicles. And so this brings me to slide 4, where we're navigating the opportunity of electric vehicle infrastructure. We have a tremendous opportunity to work with private companies, public agencies, and nonprofit organizations to understand and evaluate environmental regulations and policy, facilitate multi-stakeholder initiatives, shape business strategies, and deploy clean energy technologies. This collaboratory effort seeks to improve transportation and reduce carbon emissions across the transportation sector.
John, could I just make a comment? I think in addition to, the carbon emissions are the NOx emissions, just to make sure we're all clear on it.
Yes, and to be specific, it's the nitrogen oxide emissions that Volkswagen settled their emissions cheating scandal over. The next slide, please. So we need to ensure that there's equitable access to electric vehicle charging to all Missourians. This is why the minimum practical network is key to doing so. We're providing more equitable access to charging infrastructure for all utility ratepayers and communities, and increasing mobility for all Missourians through utility partnerships with transportation programs focused on serving disadvantaged communities, our rural communities as well. I'd also like to add our inner city communities. I believe we definitely must focus on addressing their needs and definitely reaching out to them. Also, improvements to resiliency and reliability will be vital when assessing local energy infrastructure and critical facilities through structured planning exercises that strategically increase energy efficiency and renewable energy production. The Volkswagen Trust has the potential of providing innovative paths forward for small and medium-sized communities, investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and electric cooperatives. As they seek to achieve their capital planning, clean energy, and economic development goals. Next slide, please. Stimulating widespread EV adoption in Missouri through the acceleration of the transportation sector, the role regulators will play in safeguarding that investments in the electrical grid to accommodate widespread transportation electrification to create the benefits for Missourians and their respective communities. There's a few questions that must be addressed when assessing the potential build-out of a robust charging network, and these include how much charging infrastructure is needed to support the anticipated level of EV penetration, what transmission and distribution system upgrades and investments will be needed to accommodate electric vehicles, how can regulators help ensure equitable access to charging infrastructure, and how should the costs and benefits of utility investment in charging infrastructure be assessed, and how can programs be designed to maximize the benefits? And one last thing, how should utilities recover the costs of infrastructure investment? Next slide. Crucial implementation recommendations in an effort to ensure a well-designed an effectively implemented comprehensive charging network, we as a group must continue to focus on maintaining competitive access to charging infrastructure development for third parties, developing electric vehicle infrastructure in a way that is accessible to low and moderate income communities, and protecting utility ratepayers and avoiding significant stranded costs. And lastly, ensuring that electric infrastructure is capable of incorporating an increased electric vehicle charging load with careful and thorough consideration. This planning process, with the help of the strategies for procurement and deployment subgroup, with the electric vehicle infrastructure workgroup as a whole, will play a key role in helping to guide and optimize electric vehicle infrastructure development in the state of Missouri. That's all I have for.
I think what I heard you say, you don't want us to be charging up our electric vehicles using coal in Missouri, right? You want to expand the renewable energy. Is that too much of a leap of faith?
I think we all want to expand the renewable energy, that's for sure. Yeah, we do. Ameren included.
Excellent. Thanks, John, for that presentation. I think one of the main things that the strategies group has been doing is looking at other states to see what they've done on EV charging. So we're working on filling out. Jane's helped out. Larry's helped out. I've added a couple lines to our spreadsheet, kind of looking at what other states have been doing and seeing what lessons we can learn. I know I've talked to 2 states in particular and just asked them, what worked well about your RFP process? What would you do differently? Just trying to see what stumbling blocks we can avoid, if at all possible. But all of this just helps to inform us on where we're going next with the subgroup. Yeah.
Could we pull up that
Spreadsheet?
the
Sure.
matrix, and go over it now?
Sure.
That'd be great.
So we have the room until the end of the day, but I will say in the interest of
Great.
time, I think maybe if you guys would be willing to hang with us for another 10, maybe 15 minutes tops, we'll let you go. If you need to go now, I completely understand. Does that work for folks? Make sure my managers are okay with us going long too, okay?
Too, but you all are doing great. Most of this is over my head, so I'm amazed at the work you've done. I really appreciate it. So.
Just a quick question while you're in there. You know if any of the other states or if anybody's done an RFI in advance of an RFP?
I had that same thought as well.
Yes, a few states did an RFI, and they just asked what would be your potential interest in doing a bid. Are you a charge host location? Are you a charge installing company? Are you a utility? So
I
there.
was looking at the detail, just wanted to see
Yeah.
instead of just asking for RFPs, if you'd also got your hands on RFIs
Uh,
to see.
I have not gotten my hands on the RFIs. I've seen that states, I looked at their RFP and I saw that they had done an RFI before, so that helped inform the way they moved forward. But in some cases, an RFI, if you're asking someone for very specific information, they may be hesitant to share that with you because it's proprietary or it's part of their operations. So there may be a perceived opening of the books that they may not want to share. So in some ways,
They might tell you what kind of information they can't tell you, so you know what kind of information to ask in the RFP.
oh, that's true too. Yeah, we can definitely consider that. That's
Sorry,
great.
this-
That's not on our slideshow.
Yeah. This is Tom, just a quick note. I think that, a good resource out there, not necessarily comprehensive, but would be the RFI that ASIO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, developed in support of the Rev West states.
Yes.
So-
I have asked for their information. I have not heard back. I just got the pop-up reminder that I hadn't heard back, and it's been about a week and a half. So I'll poke and ask for more information from that as well. Was that something you guys had responded to in particular? Okay, great. jump back to the spreadsheet here.
Might be interesting for folks if they have done their homework. I've only done half of mine for the California, but I have pulled it down and I have contacted a couple of folks that were involved. But just to speak, if there were interesting points that they picked up when they reviewed. But I have not put my information in yet. I only have half of it so far.
That's fine, yours are at the bottom.
I don't know if I can talk and walk through this at the same time without being in folks' way. So one of the subgroups had decided to come up with this matrix, and I think Dedrick with ChartPoint kind of identified some main columns, some things we would want to look at and be able to compare across different states' RFPs. So we went through and just everybody kind of took a state and started reviewing and putting the information into a spreadsheet here. So we looked at who could apply, what kind of locations were they allowing. Some states decided to do highway, some decided to do multi-unit residential and workplace charging. What are the equipment specifications? That seemed to be really key. That was one of the early on questions. If operation and maintenance is included, what kind of payment requirements there are. There's a couple other columns on the spreadsheet. Let me see, I think there's 9 on here filled in so far. Yeah, so far we've got 9 of them filled out, and I even reached out to 2 of the states where I'd reviewed their RFP and just talked to the folks in charge, and they were like, here's how we came up with this. This is the why of it looks the way it does for our state. And some of it is their upper managers wanted it this way, their legislators told them to do it this way. There were lots of different reasons why the RFPs came out in different ways, but I learned a lot by reading other people's ideas. So, not that we're copying, but we'll take the lessons learned.
I'm curious, for those that have read some, were there any that were like us where there's heavy utility engagement trying to coordinate with a state effort? Or are they all state efforts saying, we've got dollars, apply and compete?
There were a couple that I read that were not utility engaged at all. It was there was one state in particular, government-owned properties only for their first round of RFPs. So they said, we're just going to do level 2 and we're just going to do it government-owned locations. There were other states where it was a competitive bid process and it ended up being the charge installers. So the charge points and EVgo's and lily pads were the ones who were bidding on it. So I've seen a little bit of both, but I haven't seen anyone that particularly hit on utilities. A lot of them, it's a very open process. Anyone can bid. So utilities or public or private can bid.
Dedrick, are you still on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Don't mean to put you on the spot, and if you can't speak to this, then just say so, but you all were successful, I believe, in, was it Colorado?
I think it was Colorado.
As one place you're successful, but
Yes.
you got several stations. Are those coordinated with other site hosts, or are you able to speak to how that model works, where that bid process happened and you were awarded some corridors?
Yeah, so the Colorado application required coordination with both the municipality as well as the local utilities. So we secured letters of support from both of those entities. Also required close coordination with the site host. And in our Colorado portfolio, a good portion of those chargers will actually be owned by the site host. ChargePoint will own a few locations where we weren't able to find a site host, but for the most part, coordination with the municipality, coordination with utility, and in most cases, owned and operated by the site host.
Thank you.
And I'll also add, ChargePoint will definitely oversee all the installation. We'll work with installation partners to install the equipment there. And then every site has our Assure warranty, which provides 97% uptime for the term of the agreement.
So I have a follow-up question to that. So if the majority of the stations, I'm sorry, this is Lynn Shea with Associated, but if the majority of the stations are owned by the site host, was it a collaborative effort as far as who applied for the RFP with like the charge, with you, ChargePoint, the munis, and the site host? And I'm assuming they're varying site hosts across the state. It's not one brand or, you know, like, let's say.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's right. So ChargePoint is the prime applicant on all of those. And then in the event where a site host will own the equipment, we execute a donation agreement. And in that donation agreement, it has all the required pass downs from the funding agreement. So, whether it's, 5 years operation, 97% uptime, publicly available, we make sure all of those requirements are, show up in the donation agreement.
If you want, if you pulled up the Colorado RFP, I could really quickly just go through like the key points on it.
Oh, the RFP on the base camp?
Yeah.
Sure.
Would that be okay? I think it'll.
yeah, I think that would be helpful if other people have done.
Hi, this is Tom. Just wanted to offer a little bit of color.